Hi, Samantha. Can you hear us?
Hello?
Hello?
Yep, I'm here. Just saw
Yes?
you tried to call my phone. Do you want to try to call back there?
Excuse me, we have checked the tone.
Okay.
Can you say something, please?
Hello, test, 1, 2, 3. Test.
Great, great. You can do it in German? Okay.
I don't speak 9.
Now we have your picture on the in our big cinema here. Okay, thanks for speaking, Samantha. We have seen the film Blackfish in the evening, and I hope there are some questions for you. You are a former trainer of SeaWorld. We have seen in this film you have so much learned and so much experience in the past and also in the future. And I hope there are some questions for you. Wait a minute, please.
Okay.
Yes, there is one person who has the question. Do you know anything about orca hunting today for amusement parks or for other things?
I didn't totally get that question. I didn't totally hear what you said. Can you try one more time?
The question was, do you know anything about orca hunting today?
Oh, yes. Actually, the Russians have just been in the process of capturing orcas, unfortunately. So when I started 3 years ago, when I started speaking out against captivity, there had not been any new captures. But recently, in the past year, the Russians have captured a total of, I think it's 7 or 8 orcas now, and 2 of them have now been moved to Sochi for the Olympics. So they're going to actually keep them on display during the Olympics, which is really, I mean, this captures on that level have not been done since the late 70s, early 80s. And then, of course, you guys may be familiar with Morgan, this story about Morgan the orca. Morgan was captured in the Netherlands. She was in the Wadden Sea, and she's actually from a pod of whales who is from, I believe it's from actually Norway. And the Dolphinarium Harderwijk captured her under a rehab and release permit. And once they had her there, they said that she was not releasable, and she was then moved to Loro Parque, which you saw in the movie. It's the Canary Islands, an autonomous region of Spain. So she's there now, and there was just a retrial to try to determine if they could keep her or if she was going to be rehabilitated and be able to go back into the ocean. Right now, Loro Parque is saying that Morgan is deaf, and that's one of the reasons she can't return to the ocean. But there's a big trial, and we're still waiting to hear what the verdict is going to be for that. But the big thing really is the Russian captures, because they're just going for it. And unfortunately, Russia and China and Japan still want to have these animals on display. So even though things are changing in the U.S. and the EU, there's definitely an issue in Russia and China.
Okay, thanks.
Blackfish before. So do you think there's a realistic chance that SeaWorld will shut down the orca shows now?
I think we have the best chance that we've ever had since SeaWorld opened, almost 50 years ago, that things could change. I don't know if you guys are aware, but SeaWorld had a concert series that was scheduled to happen, I believe, starting in February, and they had a lot of famous artists from the 80s and 90s who were lined up to play. And we have been, there's a group of people on Twitter and in social media, on Facebook and Tumblr, people all over the world who've seen the movie, who have been pressuring these artists to not perform at SeaWorld. So far, the bands Bare Naked Ladies and Willie Nelson and Heart actually just canceled today. So we have 3 really well-known artists that have now said, based on what we've seen in the movie Blackfish, and based on how SeaWorld treats their animals, we're not going to perform at your park. I mean, so this is huge. We're actually reaching a level of cultural saturation that I would not have expected 3 years ago. So SeaWorld's starting to feel the pressure. Another thing that I recently heard was that they were, compared to the same period last year, SeaWorld was down in about 1 million visitors. Their stock price is going down. Their gate their ticket sales are going down, and they're getting an unprecedented amount of public pressure to stop the shows and figure out a way to, humanely either release the animals that are releasable or get the animals that aren't into some sort of a sea sanctuary situation. So I absolutely think that the orca shows will shut down. My goal is not to shut down the company, and I don't think that's a realistic goal. They're $2.2 billion company, so they shouldn't shut it down because they're the ones that actually have the money to do the rehab program, and I think they can actually, I say they can use their powers for good, and they can actually make a difference, and they can be teaching people about like real conservation and education. So I think there's a lot of reasons they should stay in business, but they don't need to have the animal exploitation side of the business anymore. But yes, I believe that it is going to change. Probably not in the next 5 years, but by the end, maybe in the next 10 to 20 years, you won't see any more killer whales in captivity in the U.S.
Yes, thanks.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I have a question about the Laurel Park.
Sure.
I was there in 2011, and it seemed very cared. And I want to know, do you know more about the Laurel Park treatment of the animals there?
Yeah, in fact, I was just there. I just came back from a 3.5 week trip to Europe to promote Blackfish. So after I was in Belgium, I actually went to the Canary Islands for 3 days, and I spent 2 full days at Laurel Park observing the killer whales and watching how they were taking care of the animals. And then after that, I actually got to have a conversation with Dr. Ingrid Visser, who is she's an orca biologist who works in New Zealand. She's one of the people who's been trying to head up the whole movement to get Morgan out of Laurel Park. And we had this fascinating conversation because she showed me footage from Laurel Park and how the animals were really being aggressive with Morgan and really attacking her. And she was showing me this footage, and she said, "Oh, isn't this horrible?" And I said, "Wow, that just looks like normal to me." So we realized that from her perspective as a scientist, she doesn't see a lot of aggression in the wild at all, not compared to what you see at the marine parks. So it's not so much how the animals are being taken care of, because from my perspective as a trainer, they were being taken care of basically according to the SeaWorld standard of care. They were being moved around so that they could get animals in the front pool to do the right show. They were Morgan often got put in the medical pool before the shows just so that she wouldn't get out to the front pool. So what I saw was kind of normal standard of care for SeaWorld, but it was really clear to me that what I was able to view as a trainer and what actually happens in the wild are 2 very different things. And it's just another example of how you cannot meet these animals' needs in captivity. It's just not possible. They get really frustrated and start fighting with each other because of the small space. So Laurel Park, the Orca Ocean facility, is equivalent to Shamo Stadium in Orlando or California or Texas. It's no different, but compared to the space that these animals would have in the wild, we're talking less than 1/10,000th of a space. So they really have nowhere to go, and they get frustrated with each other. And unfortunately for Morgan, and you can find pictures on the internet, she's been so stressed that she has started chewing on the sides of the pools, and she's wearing her teeth down. And so at a certain point, SeaWorld will have to go, well, actually Laurel Park, their vets will have to go in and drill out the pulp in her teeth, and then they'll have to start flushing her teeth several times a day with a betadine solution to make sure she doesn't get fish stuck in there. And if that happens, it makes it much harder for her to be released to the wild. Her only option might be a sea pen. So Laurel Park is like any other killer whale facility in the world. It's not the worst facility out there. There's a lot worse places you could be a killer whale in captivity, but in terms of what the animals need, it doesn't meet their needs.
Okay, thank you.
Won't accept the decision of the court by separating trainers and orcas. Are there any news now?
There was an appeal that just happened. SeaWorld appealed the ruling, and again, we're waiting for that decision. They made a lot of arguments trying to say that the government couldn't regulate how the trainers interacted with the orcas, because that was like saying that we want to prevent football players from hurting each other in a game. They were making a case that it's part of the job of an animal trainer is dangerous, and that the trainers accept that risk. But the problem is that SeaWorld trainers are employees. They're not contract workers. So like, let's say you're a NASCAR driver or racer. You're working for yourself and you're making lots of money. And you can say on any given day, I don't want to race today. Or, there's something wrong with this car, so I'm not getting in this car. I'm not going to race in this car. The SeaWorld employees are not in the same situation. They're actually employees of the company. They don't make that much money. I mean, I started at $7.50 an hour, which euros, that would be probably like 4 euros. It's not very much money. And even now, the most senior people there are probably making the equivalent of maybe like a $40,000 salary. Maybe the top is $50,000, which is still, so what would that be, about 35,000 euros. And so they are really forced, just like the whales are forced to perform every day, the trainers are forced to perform every day too. And given the situation of the animals being frustrated and not getting their needs met in captivity, and of course we have a list of all of the aggressions that have happened up to this point, it's just inevitable that if you put the trainers back in close proximity with these animals, that there are going to be more injuries and more people are going to get killed. So I think the evidence is there, and it's just a matter, this is of course a financial issue for the company. They want to get their trainers back in the water because that's their signature, what we call their Nike swoosh of a trainer jumping off the orca's nose. So of course they would prefer that, but the question is whether or not the government is going to side with SeaWorld or side with OSHA. And right now I'd say it could go either way. The judge in the original ruling was very clear that it was not safe for the trainers to interact with these animals in close proximity, although he did reduce the fine. I think you might have, I'm not sure if the movie covered it, but initially during the original lawsuit with OSHA, OSHA claimed that it was a willful violation, that they actually knew that Tilikum was dangerous and that he had killed people before, and that by putting Dawn in that situation, that they were actually making a willful choice to endanger their employees. And so it was a higher fine. The judge in the original case reduced that fine and said it was serious, which meant that they did put their employees in danger, but they didn't do it on purpose. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, and as soon as I know something, I'll be reporting it. I've got so you guys know, you can always contact me on Twitter. I'm at Sam10K, that's @SAM10K, and then I also tweet under another account called Voice of the Orcas, and that's at voice_OT_orcas. So we put information out as soon as we get it. So right now we haven't heard anything on the case, but great question, thanks.
Ever in a dangerous situation yourself?
Not with the orcas. When I worked at SeaWorld, I started out at the Whale and Dolphin Stadium. I was there for 1.5 years, and then I was moved to the Killer Whale Stadium. So I worked with the orcas for a little over a year, and I swam with them, but I wasn't doing the high energy behaviors, jumping off their nose. I was doing the fast swims, and I was doing the more gentle stuff in the water with them. And there were 3 animals that I swam with total, and over a shorter period of time. So me personally, I haven't been hurt by an orca. I have actually gotten injured by sea lions and otters. I've had quite a bit of otter bites. One of the things that I was hoping to get into the movie that didn't make it was there's a video of me holding a North American river otter that actually bites me in the chin. So, and I've been knocked around also by dolphins and beluga whales. And so, and I saw a lot of aggressive behavior against trainers in the water. But really, what it comes down to is the more time you spend in the water, it's just inevitable that you're going to get into some kind of accident with a killer whale. It's just a law of averages. So everybody that I knew that had at least 2 years of experience swimming with them or more had something happen to them, even if it was minor.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Another question was: are there reintroduction programs, I think, if it is possible to release the orcas into the wild again?
Yeah, so that's a good question and also very complicated. So I'll start with, as far as dolphins are concerned, there's been 26 dolphins that have been released into the wild. So you can read about those. I think Ingrid Visser has it on her Free Morgan site, so you can read about that. So with dolphins, it's definitely been done. With killer whales, the only documented situation has been with the whale from the movie Free Willy. His name was Keiko, and he was living in a very small pool in Mexico. The water was very warm. He was unhealthy. He was used in the movie Free Willy, and then kids all over the world sent in their pennies and raised money, and then angel investors came in. Keiko was moved from this tank in Mexico to a larger tank at the Oregon Aquarium, and then eventually he was moved to a sea pen in Iceland, and finally he was able to swim on his own from Iceland to Norway. He actually interacted with other killer whales. So this was over the period of years with millions and millions of dollars spent on him, and eventually he did die in the wild of pneumonia, but he went from this tiny little pool in Mexico where he was like days away from death. He was so sick, he couldn't hold his breath underwater for more than a minute, and he was about 2,000 pounds underweight. So, so this was some people consider this an incredible success story. Other people say this is the worst case of animal abuse on the planet. So you have to think how, Keiko was by himself for so many years, and it may have been confusing for him to be out in the wild. But personally, if it was me, I would choose that route than having died in that little pool in Mexico. So Keiko's the only example that we have right now. And what you have to look at is out of all the animals that are in captivity right now, so including the Russian whales and Takara, a whale at SeaWorld of Texas, just gave birth. So I think it makes about 53, 54 killer whales in captivity right now. We've got the Russian orcas that have just been captured that have just been removed from the wild. Then you have animals there's 5 animals at the SeaWorld parks who were captured from the wild. Kasatka, Corky, Tilikum, Katina, and Ulysses. So they're all wild-caught animals. They used to be in the wild. And then the rest of the animals at SeaWorld are all captive-born. So they've never been in the wild. So then you have to look at, okay, so you've got animals that have never been out in the wild, you have animals that have been in the wild, and you have also animals that have been in captivity for so long that they are, in some cases, very sick, and they're reaching the end of their lifespan. So, you really have to look at each killer whale on an individual basis to see who would be a good candidate for release. What many of us think is that one of the better candidates for release would be Lolita. She's at the Miami Seaquarium, and you actually saw her capture footage in the movie from 1970. She's been in captivity for 43 years. She's been alone since 1980, but because she's been by herself and she hasn't had other animals to fight with, she hasn't been frustrated and chewing on the gates like some of the other animals. She hasn't been fighting with other animals, so her teeth are actually in really good condition. And she's actually relatively healthy, and she's basically middle-aged for a killer whale, and her family's alive in the wild. So we know where her family is. They're the southern residents, and so she could be rehabbed and released back out into the wild. She'd be probably the first whale that I would try, because we know that she's even recognizing the calls of her pod right now, even though she's been in captivity for 43 years. So she'd be a good candidate. An animal that probably isn't a good candidate for total release, but still could make it into a sea pad, might be Tilikum, because obviously Tilikum's killed 3 people, and he's also very sick and old. So, and he needs to be under human care. He's on antibiotics and antifungals, and he has to eat 10 gallons of gelatin a day just to keep him hydrated, and he's got ulcers. There's so many reasons with him that he really couldn't be on his own. But even so, he might be able to make it into a sea pen environment where he wasn't completely on his own, but at least he could have more of a natural life. So again, it's very, very complicated answer, and a lot of people have questions about
your answers. You're living in Alaska, I think so. It's not much cold there, I think. Also in Germany. Thanks for your answers, Samantha. And
Thank you.
Thanks for your way. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Have a great day or great night.
Your applause.
Night.
This
Bye-bye.
is your applause from Germany.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Dankeschön.